Bind mounts versus volumes. Docker provides multiple storage options. Bind mounts and volumes are the most common. Both allow data to persist outside containers. Understanding the differences is essential. Lesson objectives. Understand bind mounts. Understand Docker volumes. Compare their advantages and disadvantages. Learn when to use each option. Quick review of Docker volumes. Docker manages the storage location. Volumes exist independently of containers. Data survives container deletion. Commonly used in production environments. Volume example. Command. Docker volume create myvolume. Docker run v myvolume /app/data Ubuntu. Docker manages storage automatically. Applications access data through mounted paths. What is a bind mount? A bind mount maps a host folder directly. The container accesses real host files. Data remains on the host machine. Common during development. Bind mount example. Windows. Docker run vc /projects/app Ubuntu. Linux. Docker run v/home/user/project/app Ubuntu. The core difference. Docker volume. Docker manages storage. Bind mount. User manages storage. This is the most important distinction. Volume architecture. Container. Docker volume. Docker managed storage. Docker controls the storage location. Bind mount architecture. Container. Host directory. Actual files. The container accesses host files directly. Real-world development example. Host folder. C:\projects/web app. Bind mounted. /app inside container. Changes appear immediately. Why developers use bind mounts? Live code updates. Faster development. Easier debugging. No image rebuilds required. Instant feedback loop. Development workflow without bind mounts. Edit code. Build image. Run container. Test application. Repeated continuously. Development workflow with bind mounts. Edit code. Refresh application. Test application. Much faster workflow. Live code synchronization. Files change on the host. Containers immediately see updates. No rebuilding required. Ideal for active development. Advantages of bind mounts. Real-time file synchronization. Easy debugging. Direct access to files. Excellent for development. Simplified testing. Disadvantages of bind mounts. Host path dependency. Reduced portability. Security concerns. Platform-specific configurations. More difficult production management. Portability challenges. Machine A. C:\projects/app. Machine B. D:\apps/project. Bind mounts may require reconfiguration. Security considerations. Containers access host files directly. Host data may be exposed. Accidental file modification is possible. Production systems require caution. Understanding Docker volumes again. Docker manages storage. Host paths are abstracted. Easier portability. Better isolation. Preferred for production. Advantages of volumes. Docker managed. Easier migration. Better portability. Cleaner architecture. Production friendly. Volume example. Docker volume create app data. Docker run v app data /app/data Ubuntu. Docker handles storage automatically. Comparing storage management. Bind mount. Host folder. Container. Volume. Docker storage. Container. Backup considerations. Volumes. Easier to manage. Easier to back up. More predictable storage. Bind mounts. Depend on host file system. Manual management required. Performance considerations. Linux. Similar performance. Windows and macOS. Volumes may perform better. Always test for your workload. When to use bind mounts. Software development. Local testing. Source code editing. Debugging. When to use volumes. Databases. Persistent storage. Production applications. Shared data. Database storage example. MySQL container. Docker volume. Persistent database files. Recommended production approach. Source code example. Node.js application. Bind mount. Source code folder. Ideal for development. Combining both approaches. Bind mount. Application source code. Volume. Database storage. Common professional setup. Production architecture example. Web application. Bind mount, development. Database. Volume, production data. Docker Compose support. Bind mount example. /app/app. Volume example. Database data /var/lib/mysql. Compose supports both methods. Common beginner mistakes. Using bind mounts for databases. Ignoring portability concerns. Exposing sensitive host files. Choosing the wrong storage type. Decision guide. Use bind mounts for development. Testing. Source code. Use volumes for production. Databases. Persistent data. Comparison summary. Docker volumes. Docker managed. Portable. Production ready. Bind mounts. Host managed. Flexible. Development focused. Interview question. Question. What is the primary difference between a Docker volume and a bind mount? Answer. Volumes are managed by Docker, while bind mounts directly map host directories into containers. Key takeaways and lesson summary. Both provide persistent storage. Bind mounts directly access host folders. Volumes are managed by Docker. Bind mounts are ideal for development. Volumes are preferred for production workloads.